Recording started here. Okay, so this is
Yeah, that's my default.
April 23rd and AKV3 discussion. So it's interesting that it seems like we're all dealing with lumber this morning. Just a question of what size a piece of lumber is whacking us upside the head today. So maybe we'll get someplace with that. I did kind of want to circle around here, wanted to really focus initially this morning on the event that we had yesterday with the students and the faculty at APU, including some UAA students. So I wanted to touch on that. I wanted to touch a little bit on the writing program, and then also talk a little bit about what's coming up this summer in terms of the opportunities that we have for continuing the discussion and the activities around the summer, as opposed to doing the Alaska cultural thing of taking a break on that. So does anybody have any other agenda items you want to make sure we touch on today? Going once, going twice. Cool. Okay. So let's just run around table and just check in who's here, what's going on, and see what's happening. I think we've kind of already done a little bit of that, but Ryan, are you gonna be able to stick around in the meeting, or do you have to roll?
I'm gonna have to be largely quiet and listening. I'll try to join in as much as I can, because I was really impressed with yesterday's panel and the conversation that came out of it. So
cool. Okay, thanks. Squirrel, what's going on with you today? Other than the mute button.
Not bad, dealing with the dilemma that we Alaskans face pretty much every spring between being inside working and being outside working. So I found a solution to that. But no, pretty well. Good news that I have is that what we're doing seems to start percolating into other networks, and people are getting notice on that. And it just happened yesterday that somebody said, oh, by the way, I will not be available between this and this because I have this thing going on. Do you want to join? Like, that sounds familiar. And that was the APU. So I mean, at that moment, I was not able to join, otherwise I would have been. But it was really pleasant to see that somebody that got the information from a different channel, from a different venue.
That is good news. Okay. Ben, what's going on with you today?
Hey, sorry, is that to Ben?
That was to Ben.
Hey, what's up, guys? I'm just got back from Denver, integrating with the new ownership, and so I wanted to call in today. We're doing a group trash pickup at the shop, but I just wanted to kind of like lurk and listen and build the habit of coming and being a part of this. So not a lot going on, trying to pick up trash for a day and clean the place up around our shop a little bit, and excited to hear and catch up with everything you guys have been doing. So if I can be useful, yell at me, but otherwise I'll be listening and hanging out.
Cool. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You bet. Kitty, what's going on with you today? Maybe multitasking.
All right, yeah, multitasking requires finding the mute button. Yeah, so I'm kind of multitasking for the day, trying to be efficient on a Friday. Mostly good things going on. Kind of a sad bit of news about a friend who I just saw a week ago passed away suddenly. So I have that kind of weird sense of get out and live, you know, especially with all this sunlight. So plan to get into the dirt with some potting soil this afternoon. So that's kind of where my mind is at. And I'll chime in, you know, because you tagged a little bit about the APU thing. Well, I'll chime in then when we get into that discussion, but I thought it was reasonably good and a decent momentum starter.
Yeah, perfect, thanks. Morning, Elijah, what's going on with you?
Morning, everybody. Not that much, just kind of enjoying the last of winter and the beginning of spring. Just excited for, you know, the sun coming back and yeah, everything.
Cool, thanks for joining us.
Mm-hmm.
Tracy, what's happening with you? Any 6x6s or 2x10s or whatever size lumber?
I was gonna say, with the price of lumber, we better be careful here, folks. You know, I'm trying not to rail at the universe and trying to be philosophical about what possibilities are in the world of COVID at my age. And I have a 27-year-old who works out on the oil platforms as a welder is in town. So I'm going to be a chauffeur this afternoon, which I'm looking very forward to spending some time with him and having some conversations as he takes care of some errands in town.
Nice, good deal. Thanks for joining us this morning. Andrea, how are you today?
I am doing well. I'm still in Arizona, and I did thoroughly enjoy last night's meeting. I was disappointed that more people didn't show up. I think if the words entrepreneurial ecosystem had been included in the title of the discussion, all 15 of my students would have shown up because they were all about that last week. So I guess, you know, part of me, it's the end of the semester, people were in the middle of finals and doing lots of things. So I'm a little bit not surprised, but at the same time, I was still a little disappointed. So, but otherwise, I've just been teaching and then doing my own personal stuff. So not much going on in my world this week.
Cool. Okay. Thanks for joining us. We're going to do a deeper dive here into the meeting here in just a second. I'm sorry, did I miss anybody? I don't think so. Okay, good. Thanks. So let's spend a little bit of time on the meeting yesterday. And I know many of you weren't there, but I think the discussion will still be practical, whether you were there or not, I hope. The first thing I wanted to throw out was this the question of the way it was framed, because we used as a framing question, what would it look like if Alaska's youth are leading and participating in the development of Alaska's next economy that ensures the health of our communities? And I'll put that in the chat so you can see it there. And I'm wondering what folks thought of that framing question in general, and more particularly for those that did come, how you felt that framing question worked or didn't work.
I'm willing to take a stab at it. I wasn't there. I think it's too much to wrap your head around.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, I mean, I understand all of the parts, and again, I in respect to the people who put it together, but you know, simpler. What's next, and what's your role? You know, because that's really what this is asking. But this becomes really scary for people who don't think they have a space or place in anything. So.
Other reactions to it, either if you were there or not there. Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, I thought that it started a good conversation. It gave us some good framework. I think it was I quickly lost track of that as our framing question, but thought that the momentum and the framework of the group kept us on track. And so I think it ended up working out for us. But I do agree, it's a lot to wrap our heads around, because we're really asking two questions at the same time. With the first question being what's next for Alaska, and then the second question saying, how do we not decide what's next? How do we get our youth to decide what's next and then go build it? But saying that, I thought it was a productive conversation. I like what folks brought to the table, and I really enjoyed the process. It's my first time going through the strategic doing framework, and it was nice to see what assets people brought to the table, and that was a nice way to get to know the folks who were there. And ultimately, I think that that's a win.
One of the things I'm curious about in this framing question is, and I accept that the question is deep, complex, and needs to be simplified. However, I'm also wondering if we had spent more time talking about the framing question and trying to unpack it, unwrap it, and explore it. I'm wondering if the framing question might have been better if we had not been so rushed in moving through the process of introducing it and then moving pretty quickly into the asset discussion and losing track of it. That's kind of my sense, is that as complex as it was, it might have worked better, assuming there'd been time to really work on it. Anybody have any thoughts on whether it was more of a timing problem, or is it just still too big and too complex of a problem, even if we had spent time discussing it more before moving on?
This is Kitty. I think that in general, the time was going to be the biggest challenge. And I think you're right, just a little more wallowing in the preliminary conversation, maybe with 1, 2, or 3 of us prompted to add flesh to the bones. And then I like Tracy's idea of, and then underscore the simplicity of it. So like give them the richness of the question, but underscore the simplicity for the rest of the conversation. What next? What's the role for youth? So that combination, I think, could have worked, even perhaps in that constrained time.
Any other thoughts on the framing question with the additional question with that of anybody have any ideas on what the framing question might be the next time, what changes you might make to it, or maybe even a different framing question that goes in a different direction?
This is Pascual. I've been thinking about that lately too, because that's also, I think, applies to this group. And I would like to bring back to the table one of the sessions that Katie did in the beginning, where she formulated some questions and we were to tackle them and answer them. That is going to also help us move forward with the group. And it comes with the same loaded question at the beginning: what is next, and then what are we going to do, or what are you going to do, or how you see yourself playing with that solution. It's a pretty broad vague question that I don't think it's not possible to answer in a way that, okay, great, this is, and everybody agrees with that, it's clear, it's concise, let's move forward. So it's always going to be an open question, because it's a future, what's going to happen in the future, what we think is going to happen in the future. And even if we have mathematical models and we can project, there's always that uncertainty that we are not able to remove. It's always going to be there. So that question is always going to be open. So I think once we accept that, and once we limit the time frame that we have to answer that, and we need to go with the most simple solution, knowing that the constraints that we have are not going to help us define it, then jump into the solution. But that then jump into, I think we have a clear set of rules, like, okay, once we get to this point, we need to go with what we have. And if it's good enough, let's go, because sometimes doing something is better than just keep talking and not doing anything. So to answer your question in a little bit shorter time frame, to summarize, it's always going to be challenging because of the nature of the question. And it's always going to be careful with the resources, because sometimes some of them will be useful for an answer. Some of those resources will be useless for a different answer. So it's always going to be open.
Okay. So here's where I've landed on the question, and I'm curious about this. I think the question is very aspirational, and I think, at least as far as a youth focus, it's too aspirational. And I'm thinking that it needs to be dialed down into something that is more tangible, in terms of some outcome or some result. And rather than being a question about leadership, that it really needs to be maybe a different question about what the youth might create, what they might do, something that's an intermediate step, that as a result of maybe accomplishing something, doing something, that they might find themselves now becoming the leaders. But rather than asking a question that asks them to immediately vault themselves from where they're at to being in a leadership position, that instead there needs to be maybe an intermediate set of questions or framing of a more practical next step. Not just simpler, but something that's more practical in the outcome that they create that becomes transformative because of what they did, if that makes sense. Tracy, I see you ready to jump in.
Yeah, I think I would echo what you just said, but I would even take you back to the comment you were having earlier about teaching entrepreneurship. I think that what I heard in the planning session, and I realized that I had not been part of previous parts of that planning session, was that there were two things that were happening. It was an effort to use a model that's very helpful, that you knew you didn't have enough time with, and you had a bunch of other outstanding questions about number of rooms and how to handle it in the virtual setting. So you were trying to adapt and trying to use something that could be useful, but you had some concerns about whether it would be based on the time frame. But the other thing is, I think, meeting people where they're at. I think your comment about the aspiration was a piece. I think people who have not been used to thinking about big vision or big scalable or big anything, this just shuts them down. And when I was on the call about planning the other day, I kept trying to say, can we operationalize something? And I know that, if you do that, it's that simplification, it's that explanation. You could even break it down into its component parts if you wanted to keep the bigger thing, but have it be clearer what everybody's landing on to start out with. And I think those things all came together with a desire to not underestimate their ability and see who might meet you there. And the other thing was the timing. You and I don't know, Andrea, but this time of year is a hard time to get any student to think expansively because they're tending to focus inward and freak out. And so that combination, I think all of those things coming together made it probably whatever happened harder.
Gotcha. Go, Elijah.
I think that for kids, asking young people to like envision the future is a big step. I think that possibly kind of reining that back to people that are in their middle or elder age, and kind of scaling that back, like in hindsight, if you were a youth again, and you've been through your life experience of what the world offers or has to offer, how would you recreate that if you could? I think that kind of that framework with kind of the experience that, going through life has would kind of give some more perspective on, if you could change the way the world is now 30 years ago, what would you have created? How would you have hoped that your career opportunities had manifested, or the way that the landscape of the society is sitting? I think that is possibly something to think over.
It's a nice idea. I'm writing down somehow looking back to look forward.
Yeah. I mean, the youth, I mean, it's so hard. I mean, they're just kind of like pushed into the world, and kind of as we go through it, you kind of see your different options and try to make the best one as you're going forward. But in hindsight, kind of trying to like lay that out for yourself now from, your perspective. And then also just wondering, for the youth, what is it that they want in life? What are the things that they would envision a great life being, 30 years forward? What would that look like, possibly, as kind of a little different way of framing it?
I want to move on to looking at kind of the event overall, but I just want to ask Ryan, I saw you pop into there for a second. Did you have something you wanted to say before we move on? Going once, going twice. Okay, so looking at the event as a whole, the design process, the outreach, the format, the result, what would you say went well? And what would you want to change next time? Obviously, the framing question being the one we did a little deeper dive in terms of how we might change that. But other than the framing question, in terms of the event overall, with the target towards youth, what went well? What would you change next time?
This is where you need to ping Kitty. Kitty.
I'm off mute. I'm in a car now. Hopefully the audio works okay. What I thought went well overall was the quality of discussion, in that for all the sort of imperfections that we might see, I think people got engaged, and I'm talking about both the students and the kind of faculty and co-facilitators. There was input and dialogue, and to me, a sort of sense of energy building a movement, a field, which is one of those regenerative practices. So I didn't honestly think that might be the case because I was so worried about the short time frame and the technology and how people would engage. So, good people showed up, made great contributions, and I thought did heighten an energy field. And I will add also to the question, the comment you made earlier, Kai, about, the ideas are kind of at a scale that people are more comfortable with, not quite as BHAG as you might think, but that resonates with the whole regenerative practices and, local community-based economies where there's a lot of reciprocal efforts. They're not always super grand scale. Nonetheless, you still got some ideas like, hey, let's leverage our cargo hub, let's leverage our climate in being able to produce crops that others can't. So to me, it wasn't, it was positively surprising the level of engagement and energy I heard. That's my positive.
Thanks. Andrea, what did you were very actively involved and saw a lot of this. What from your perspective went well, and what would you change next time?
I would change the timing so that more students would be likely to engage.
Right.
But I do think that there was a very high quality of conversation for sure. And I was actually, for some reason, I was thinking, it triggered me to think differently than I've been thinking. So the facilitation, I thought, was effective in that I can get into a rut in thinking, holding on to my particular perspective and my thoughts. And, some of the things that I came out with, I really had not been in my mind until we were having that discussion last night. And so I think the format was really effective. I think that it would have been difficult to have as high quality of conversation if we did have more people there. I would like to be able to take what we got from last night and maybe create a something that we can take to the public and get more engagement and continue to kind of push these ideas forward. But I think what comes to my mind is that when I was 18 years old, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, no clue. Not only that, but I didn't even know what my options were. And so I think when we're asking kids to think, or youth to think about where they want to be in the future, we're asking a question they can't answer because they don't know what their options are. And so I think as the older folks, the elders in this, one of the things that we need to do is give some framework to what options are and what is upcoming in the future so that we can start engaging kids to recognize, oh, okay, I can be an engineer and help solve this problem, or I can be a mathematician and help solve this problem, or I can go into healthcare and start to solve this problem. So help them create goals for what they want to do with their lives by giving them sort of a bigger purpose, if that makes any sense. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of that, I think, in terms of really touching on their capacity to be able to see more of the future and engage in that discussion and different facets in terms of options, futures, perspectives that they need to have to be able to really engage in that more deeply. Cool, thanks. I'm trying to think of others that were there. I think that's most of it. A couple of things I wanted to throw out for you from my perspective. Uh, I think the list of assets that we collected, that process and that discussion was really a powerful approach. And I like that part of strategic doing, and I think it hit there. And I was, as I put in the chat last night when we were doing this, I was so utterly impressed with the student skills and experience and backgrounds that they had in terms of languages, cultures, experiences. It really kind of threw me for a bit of a loop, because I went into it kind of with the bias that students would have a hard time with this kind of activity because they have this limited worldview experience and whatnot. And yet, if you looked at that list that the students have, and then all of us collectively in there, it was an amazing, rich array of assets. And I don't think it just reminded me that I shouldn't underestimate the capacity and the richness of the youth and what they can bring to this. But to Andrea's point, we have to figure out how to empower them to really understand the value of what they have and what they could do with it, whether that's modeling that or giving them next steps to do that. That being said, on the flip side of that, I don't think we did, I don't think we had enough time or process to really do what was intended there, which was to really understand how to look at those assets and to use those as the basis for getting into the opportunities. We pretty quickly got into having a discussion about opportunities that were really divorced and separate from the list of assets. And they were just good ideas that people had of things to do, but they didn't build off of the assets as much as was intended in that discussion, because the strategic doing approach is one of bringing people together to build, link, and leverage the assets they have, as opposed to dreaming about the projects they wish could be done, but are somewhat independent of the assets that they bring to that. And I think that step kind of, that connection wasn't maintained as tightly as it normally would. And we're back to the same problem of the timing of this in terms of where students were at. This is the very last week of classes. They're thinking about finals. Their brains are converging on survival, but also just the time that we had for the meeting. Normally these, kinds of events running this would be a 3-hour discussion. We put it into 90 minutes because that's the time we had. The other thing I wanted to offer was that I think we need to explore how to improve the ability to protect the discussion of the elders versus the youngers. It kind of got mashed up, and when things kind of slowed down, the elders kind of jumped in with their plans. And I don't think I don't think we had a way to be able to capture as much of the youth leadership in the discussion that might have happened. And part of that's, my own fault for, because we didn't have that big a group, rather than splitting up into what was planned to be up to 3 breakout groups in order to have smaller, more intimate discussions. We decided to keep it as one big group. But the intent when I did that was, and I wasn't clear and explicit about that, was to keep everyone together, but still to keep it primarily focused on the youth that had arrived to the meeting. And yet we ended up with an interesting discussion, but there was a level playing field of participation. And so the focus on the youth participation and discussion didn't get as much focus and priority, I guess, as I was hoping would happen. I don't know. Those of you that were there, what are your thoughts on that? Do you agree, disagree, or have a different perspective on that?
This is Kitty again. As I mentioned in the kind of closing, when it was just you and I and Yasso, with the time frame we had, breakouts would have actually meant maybe getting less done. So in some ways, I liked the intimacy of this, because all the shuffling back and forth and then debriefing, people could really build on everything they heard in the group we had. So I'm not disappointed with that. And I also kind of I liked the cross-generational dialogue. I mean, we could have really sat silent as the hosts, if you will, and nurtured more from the students, but that doesn't give them the benefit of building on our ideas, which relates to what somebody I think said here about how they can't quite see how to take their assets into the future. And the third thing I would add is a few redesigns, given what I'm hearing. Like you could have refined the kind of final piece called, as you think about, you know, wrapping up finals right now, and that's full on your brain, like acknowledge that, just to say in just a matter of a week or so, you're going to be in summer mode, and how might this conversation promote and propel you into even one simple action that you can see your role in any of these opportunities. And that leads to another one of my sort of design enhancements I would recommend is I think we do need a different technology, something like Mural or Canva, where they can still see the guiding question, they can still see the assets. These students are pretty damn savvy with the virtual learning now, more so than we geezers. And so they could have, yes, if we use one of those and it's visually attractive, you know, they could navigate around and enter. So they're real familiar with that sort of simultaneous entry, putting their own comments in, you know, that they could have done instead of me trying to capture notes. So those are a few things all bundled together for you.
Cool, thanks. So wrapping all this together, what do you think we learned from this event?
It needs to be a deeper and longer conversation. I think, I mean, we just scratched the surface, and we could go so much deeper into it. So I guess the trick is to figure out what that venue would be.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that I took away from this, and this is getting into some of the weeds, I think, of some of the feedback, is that there really was a lot of energy around the idea of innovation and space for students to be able to engage in opportunities. And I guess what I did learn out of this is that this idea of engaging the youth is valuable, and it is a path we need to develop, because this was kind of a test of, you know, what was going to happen here in terms of this discussion. And I felt good about the what we learned is that there's some highly capable students. I was amazed by their assets. There is a resource there to be harnessed, and I think there's an opportunity for us to work on trying to solve this problem of how do we bring the youth into the leadership role and full participation in the question of what's next. And I came away kind of energized that it is the right direction. There is something there that we need to figure it out, and we need to keep at it.
Kai, with the keep at it comment, I'm curious what we didn't have time for. Oh, and so, you know, by the way, like, I think we needed to design for maybe only getting halfway through strategic doing with that personal impact question where they can free entry, but also a specific invitation to some follow-up. But we do sort of still have that option, and I think it might be worth discussing here and with Yasso, you know, what would be a way of keeping people's ideas alive quickly, like thinking about your role this summer, you have your assets. How do your assets contribute to the opportunities shared? And then join us in a few months or a couple months when we'll touch base again and see what this sparked. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think this is exactly right, and this was jumping down to the next question I was going to get to, which is what questions should we ask of the participants and the registrants about the event? Because we have an opportunity right now to go back. YASO is going to send out a survey to everyone that registered, and the survey will try and solicit feedback from both the people that registered who didn't show up to potentially find out, what was it that kept them away. But also for the students, well, all the participants who did come, we want to ask some questions about what they got out of it. And to your point, I think I want to ask some questions about how do they think they could continue in some fashion or some steps this summer, and what they would like to see in the future as far as another event or something. But anyway, I'm looking for some more feedback from anybody on questions we might ask or how we might ask them.
One thing that I'm not quite sure how to even frame this, but APU has been having, at least within the IBPP, we've been having a conversation about entrepreneurship and how students across disciplines are interested in it. And in my entrepreneurship class, not all of my students are business students. And so we as an institute have been interested in pursuing turning APU into more of a magnet for entrepreneurship. But I don't know, with everything going on, that is rising up to a level of importance outside of our institute. But we need a place. I mean, there needs to be some infrastructure so that people feel like they have a way to follow up and continue to learn or have opportunities to become involved. And there just isn't a home right now. And that's, I think, really, to me, is a huge barrier. So what can we do? Can we create something? Can we map it out in a way that it's actionable, and the university doesn't have to spend energy and time trying to figure it out? How do we engage them beyond them being supportive but not understanding what their role needs to be? Does that make sense? Am I asking too much?
The only thing I can add, and Andrea, I know we've not met, but I was at APU a million years ago. This is the same question that's been asked for, back in Kai's era, before Kai's era. So I think it's a very good question. I think it makes a lot of sense. My question is, why are we still asking that question? Not why are you asking it, but what is it in Alaska, or what is it in APU, or what is it in Anchorage that has us still asking the same question 2 decades later, a decade later, 5 years later? I hear it, I just want to go, great question, but why aren't we doing this?
That's where I was stuck on that. I was, it's the right question, Andrea. It's the one that keeps coming up in different ways. Although I do think I like, let me say that I do like, not I think, I do like the way you framed it, which is how can we map this out for APU in a way that might create some sort of action without APU actually having to figure out what needs to be done. And I think there's something important in that.
Yeah, this is Brian here. I think that having a physical space is going to end up being a pretty important thing. And I've seen the impact that the boardroom has had for the startup community. And I think that having a way for folks that are maybe at the student level or that are trying to work their way into the entrepreneurial community before the boardroom, that having a place to come together would be really helpful. I'm a big advocate for those third places in community where you don't have to pay to be there. You can just sort of show up and hang out, because the interchange that happens there of ideas, of people, of culture is really powerful. And so I'd like to offer up having no claim to this space, but the Third Avenue farm site at Third and Ingra is owned by the Heritage Land Bank, and they're looking for a stakeholder to take on that site and to manage that site. And APU's name has come up because that site is the location of the former Alaska Native Medical Center. And I think that that certainly could serve as a space to gather, I mean, potentially as soon as this summer, because there's some initial activation that's happening on this site. But if there was a plan that was put together for what to do with that space that aligns with the HLB existing plan and that could align with the vision of APU, that it would make it real easy for APU to say, yeah, that could be us. Sure, we could see ourselves doing that. Oh, and you're willing to step up and do the work? I think that we could get some momentum fairly quickly with that. So I like the direction that the conversation is heading.
This is Kitty. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
I'm now masked and somewhere else. I love that idea. It's a perfect example, Ryan, of a link and leverage. And when you talk about who would, could step up and manage it, like that is a role the students could play. So it doesn't have to be the management of APU. It could actually, the development of that innovation lab hub could be, real live hands-on asset contribution for students. And it reminds me of something I almost mentioned during the program last night, there was this amazing class called School Business Partnerships in the school district years ago. And they got middle schoolers and high schools to do real world things. So, maybe it could be integrated into one of the classes that they have this service learning component where they keep this hub alive and then they bring their youthful ideas to it. I'm like doing happy dance here. Going back on mute.
Yeah, no, that's all good. Stay. And Laura's popped in here reminding us also that Jasmine Smith has got some great plans for space over in Mountain View, not too far away, both her current space, but there's another municipal piece of property she's angling in on trying to connect up with that. So we're kind of running up to the end of the time today. I think we're kind of landing on trying to continue this discussion around the space and bringing people together to be able to keep the discussion going. And where I'd like to land is for the moment is that in the last couple of posts that I've made through the Startup Digest, I got a little snarky at the Alaskan culture of kind of stopping our community building during the summer. Somehow we all take the summer off, all our community groups stop meeting during the summer. We'll come back in the fall and restart it. And I got some pushback from some folks who came back and said, Kai, there are actually some things going on in the summer. It's not as black and white as you're making it. The Alaska Business Week program for the youth is great. The Students to Startups is going on. And yet I'm still kind of, pushing on the idea that I think there's an opportunity for us to create a very unique Alaskan summer experience for community building and advancing Alaska's innovation ecosystems and its business and its culture that doesn't buy into the idea that we take the summer off, but that we do something that is uniquely Alaskan during the summer that builds off of the light, the energy, and yet respects the fact that people want to also get out and play during the summer. I don't know what that is, but I think there's an opportunity here to follow up with these students that did engage with this meeting and to not wait until the fall to re-engage with them, but to do that in a way that somehow celebrates we're in Alaska and we're not going to take the summer off to work on these big problems. Any final thoughts for today, other than I'll just mention that we ended up getting paid $500 for putting on that session yesterday. Was not my expectation, didn't know where it was going to come from. So at the moment, I'm planning on recycling that money back into the writing contest to help promote it, but also looking for some ideas if folks have any suggestions on what we might do to potentially have a pizza party with the students this summer or whatever else. It's there. We got the money. I'm going to put it into trying to advance what's going on here.
one last thought that I was kind of wondering as we were talking about this is, do we need to be a little more intentional in what we are teaching and how we're teaching entrepreneurship throughout APU, UAA, other places where entrepreneurship is being taught? Do we need to kind of teach it in a way that it ties in specifically to Alaska's economy?
I think so. I mean, that's how I took the two classes I've got. I focused them very specifically on engaging with the challenges that matter in Alaska, to try and build that awareness. But I think we need to continue to build that ethos around that idea.
Yeah, I maybe if we can pool our ideas as entrepreneurs and as entrepreneurship instructors, we could sort of create a learning library, I suppose, a resource library specifically focused on Alaskan economic issues.
You know, what you're touching on is really a fascinating, amazing thought. What if we work together to actually build a theme for the next academic year that actually, you know, creates a next Alaska theme and puts it out there for all of the people who are teaching entrepreneurship? I know I'm just saying what you just said, but I'm just processing it. But actually build the theme and the resources and the challenges, and engage the faculty in different disciplines to make this a focus of the next year, that this is the time and the students are, you know, are the opportunity for us.
Yeah, I think that's what it takes, because students tend to kind of live in their own little bubble. And if we don't connect the dots for them, they continue to live in their little bubble. And what we need to do is we need to engage them into the bigger picture. So, I mean, not what's the point of teaching entrepreneurship, but we can certainly do a better job of teaching entrepreneurship. We can meet the same goals and objectives that the accreditation requires, while at the same time creating a real world connection from what they're learning, you know, to what's important to them, which is Alaska. I mean, our students are predominantly Alaskan, so.
Yeah. But what I will offer, though, is that if from this teaching standpoint, if we don't get the faculty involved,
Right.
it won't happen. And
Right.
you know, while I had these two classes as an adjunct this spring, I could, you know, basically send the classes on a 180 from what they used to do. But that was because I was doing it. Trying to get the other faculty member at UAA to do that, to me, would be that's a project, and as long as you're teaching at APU, we can do that. But maybe we develop the theme and promote it, and you know, for those those that are willing, we try and make a dent in this.
Yeah. Well, and we can also offer it to the high school teachers that teach entrepreneurship as well.
Yeah.
So at least engage with them, and you know, most of them would be very welcome for some curriculum assistance on something like that. So
Right on there. And if we could also raise potentially some money for some prizes on some challenges and other things that would incentivize this, we could accelerate it. So we need to wrap up. I just want to take just a second and ask Laura to say hi and just tell us briefly what's going on with you. I'm glad you could join us at the end, though, but tell us what's happening in your world.
Well, Ayla's gone, so things are a bit busy right now. I mean, I don't really have anything particular to report. Things are just moving along both slowly and quickly at the same time. It's just like Einstein's dreams.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for joining us for a bit there.
I mean, it sounds like I missed a great discussion, and hopefully it'll continue. It's one that I'm quite interested in. And maybe just commenting very briefly on the thing I posted there, which is, I have always thought, we tend to think of our meeting processes as both indoors and kind of structured and maybe overly complicated. I almost just wonder if we, pick a date, pick a Kincaid location if we're not going to go out far, camp, do it a couple of days in a row. It could just be informal. We don't need a permit or anything. And just meet in groups and see what happens. I don't know. Food for thought.
I think that's a great idea. Thanks for nudging that along. That's good. Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording.